Yeah, somebody said that, gee, you got a good audience today, and I says it's because of the food. Okay, if anybody is here under the misapprehension that we are going to fight the Battle of Gettysburg, we are not. We are not. I have a piece of paper up here with a map of the actual land of the battlefield, and I have a small book that came out a few years ago that I will talk about very soon in the presentation. So, this is all about the friends, the supporters of the battlefield at Gettysburg, why it was formed, why it's important, and why my wife and I are addicted to going there. We were there just this past weekend, and I'll talk about that briefly in just a moment. So we're going to talk about the Gettysburg National Battlefield Park in the past, the present, and the future, and the historical value of the place. Why should such a ground be preserved? Why is it important? And the indispensable Barbara Finfrock, the author of this book, and it's titled 20 Years on 6,000 Acres. Gettysburg is not quite 6,000 acres, but it may become. And I throw that fact in. The federal government has outlined an area that inside that area, land can be acquired and will become part of the park. So, how big is it? When are you talking about? She is currently 84 years old. We saw her. She is not the founding board member, but without her, I don't think this organization ever would have gotten off the ground. By the way, that picture, of course, is in the National Cemetery. And that's the book, 20 Years on 6,000 Acres. This Friends group, which helps support financially and labor-wise the national park, is not the first Friends group in the United States. But after this book came out, and because of its outstanding success, this is the Bible of how to create one. They did it all right. This is an old statistic I found out. I couldn't get the updated number, but in the recent past, the Friends of the National Parks at Gettysburg have contributed over $20 million to this park. That's a chart of how its membership has gone up. It starts at a little over 1,000 in '94. By that time, my wife and I were already members. It started in '89 with just a few people and spending almost no money at all because they didn't have any. Now, what's the concern of any Friends organization? It's so that this doesn't happen to our many important historic battlefields. And as you see, this is what happens with many of them. They happened in places where people live. And after the battle is over and a century or more goes on, life goes on. And so you might have a plaque, a monument, a statue, and if you care to read it, it'll say the Battle of XYZ was fought here. Big deal. Everybody drives past it. Nobody notices a thing. This is Bristow Station and Chantilly. They weren't big battles, but again, would you know anything of any battle that took place? These are taken the closest to the center of both of those battlefields. This happens at Gettysburg, too. You know, a very important spot. Yeah, and there's something like a Pizza Hut sitting on it now, or a gas station. Or you get an open field, and there's a plaque. If you see one of those plaques, the little half-rounded top, white background and black, those are very old markers. In some places, nothing has changed since then. And even fields that are preserved, anybody's been to Manassas, well, you walk the battlefield. Lots of luck. It's worth your life crossing that road. And that's not the only road you have to cross. It's too close to D.C. It's a huge commuter road. There's constant traffic on it. And so it also isn't quiet. By the way, that's a very historic house there as well. I'll do one more example. If you're looking from that high point overlooking Chattanooga, Tennessee, very, very important in the Civil War, and you'll see some places named. One of them named twice. Let me get out my little pointer. Missionary Ridge runs from here to here. You see the Missionary Ridge sign there? First of all, the town has grown all over all of it. Missionary Ridge is where the Union forces that were trapped there smashed through the middle of the Confederate line. And you can go up on Missionary Ridge today, and I hope you like suburban houses, because that's all there is to see. This is a picture of the time, you can see. And it is unrealistic to expect that this land, in this extent, could have been preserved. So we know that all of it isn't and can't be. And the public interest in the Civil War, of course, came some years ago and then was spurred on by these two books, Battle Cry of Freedom by James McPherson, who, by the way, was one of the original board and still is a board member on the Friends of the National Parks at Gettysburg. And, of course, this Killer Angels book, which later became the movie Gettysburg, has really driven tourists to go there. Now, the problem is it's far enough past that. Now the parks are saying, we wish we had another movie to bring people here. Because, again, the attendance has gone down. There's another bright, shiny object somewhere. In 1863, there were 2,400 residents, roughly, in Gettysburg. In the town and in the area, there were roughly 200 blacks. Before the Confederates started to come, before they even entered Maryland, some of the resident black families decided that was close enough. They were leaving. As you see, it's only 12 miles from the Mason-Dixon line, and 12 different roads all converge on it, which is what made it the site for the battle. It wasn't arranged that way, just that was the easiest way for all the different armies to coalesce, and that's what they were trying to do. Now, this area that I've outlined in red, as you see, in 1863, it wasn't developed. It is now. Houses mostly in here. A big school development in here, middle school, elementary school, fields, houses. So you can't preserve everything, not even here. But how do people learn about, oh, there you get an idea. You see the dark green, that's the official land. It's almost all connected. It's in the national park. You see the Eisenhower National Historic Site there. That's the only house that Ike and Mamie ever owned. Purchased it in 1950. And we'll talk about why he was there. But another thing that Friends groups have to contend with, never mind supporting the park, is trying to keep developments like this out. What's this? This is less than 5 miles from the battlefield. It is a huge motel and convention complex that was the third proposal for a site for a casino in the immediate Gettysburg area. There is a generous contributor to the Friends who also owns the Harley-Davidson franchise in Gettysburg, who's both a friend and an enemy. The only reason that Gettysburg keeps being plagued with proposed casinos is because of this guy. The Friends and others have managed to defeat every attempt to put a casino in the Gettysburg area. So there's just some stats on it, on the place itself. The Gettysburg Railroad was good for business. It came in, but the railroad itself only existed as far as Gettysburg itself. It did not go on beyond there, not then. Matter of fact, it would be quite a few years before it ever went past that. But, and this figure is a little off. They've been revising that too. There are at least 175,000 in the two armies that showed up. At least 15,000 animals they brought with them. And by latest historical research, the South brought probably about 8,000 blacks with them as personal body slaves, as teamsters, and that sort of thing. So that's an awful lot of people in a little town. There, somebody made a little model of it. And by the way, it's pretty accurate. The main road through Gettysburg still comes through this circle. It's still there. It's exactly the same as it was then. There's a general idea of the battlefield the way it was after the first day. First day is out over here and up there. They retreated through the town. But how do most people know about the battle? Well, they look at maps like this. No, I'm not going to explain this map. This is how the two armies got there. The red is the Confederate, the blue is the Union, and it always amazes people that the South came from the North and the North came from the South. But that's it. The South was on a raid, and they were raiding and pillaging the area, bringing back horses, any kind of foodstuffs, capturing blacks, bringing them back into to be sold into slavery. And they got up as close as, in fact, when Lee said, everybody coalesce, let's get back together, they had a major contingent just this side of Harrisburg. They were ready to break through, and they would have. There wasn't any real military force there to stop them. And the military leader there was very upset because, man, he could have taken the state capital of Pennsylvania very easily. But people can look at this and what do you know about the battle? Okay, here's day one, the way it started. Notice the town's down there. Town's still down there. That's the afternoon. There's the retreat. See, I told you I'm not going to give you a test on this. It evolves. Here's day two. Here's the famous oops. One general decided to pull his troops out of this line. Big controversy whether that was a bright move or a dumb move. My opinion, it was dumb. But, so you go through all of this. There's the setup for Pickett's charge on day three. And what do you really know about the battle? What do you really learn from the war by these maps? Not a lot. So you fall back on, well, how else can I learn about it? Well, we have artwork. Remember, we couldn't take pictures then. It was a 9 or 10 second exposure time by cameras of the time. So anything that moved, oops, you didn't get it. It wasn't there. How accurate is that? Well, we'd like it to be accurate. How about this? This is an excerpt from the huge diorama painting that was made. It's in the Cyclorama. It's hundreds and hundreds of feet long. Done by a French artist and done by information he got, and I could spend quite a bit of time telling you all the historical mistakes that are in it. So what do you really know about it? Or what do you know about the story of Lee's retreat? And was this battle as it was summarized? Was this a Union success? Was the Union saved because of this battle? If you were Lincoln, you'd be furious. You had the Confederate main army. You should have destroyed it there, not allowed it to retreat. So what do you really know about it? Oh, you want to know the map of the retreat? Good. There's a test on this one. Okay, so what do human beings do? We can learn about things by coming and listening to somebody like me. Okay, how much is going to stick with you? Not much. I heard a couple of really good lectures and panel discussions last weekend when I was at Gettysburg, and boy, I write it down or have something else because you don't do it. So that means I can read something about it later. I'll retain a little more, And if they have pictures, and they did, I get a little more. If we can demonstrate it, that's great. Discussion, practicing doing it. This is the idea of preservation of the battlefield at Gettysburg. Because you can walk the look around. You can see what they saw. There are many areas where, if you know the history, you go, well, why didn't so-and-so just do that? Well, because from where they were coming from, they couldn't even see it. Surprise! I read a copy of a letter from a Confederate. And I won't get into the unit and everything else where he was, but he's describing the heavy fighting he did before they came to this mountain. This mountain, if anybody's been there, is 1/4 the size of Devil's Den, which is probably only 1/8 the size of Little Round Top. So I don't know where this country boy was from, but he'd never seen a mountain before because... So even when you read primary stuff, you don't necessarily know. And here's an illustration. I got this. This doesn't have anything directly to do with the Battle of Gettysburg, but taken from the air. We're looking down at the confluence of two rivers, and guess what this is right here? That's Harper's Ferry. We went there years ago. There's a model of the town, and you can see mountains rise steeply all around it. My wife, who had read extensively on the Civil War, as soon as we got down here, she looked around and said, now I understand everything. You could not militarily hold this ground here when mountain here, mountain there, and mountain back over there are filled with your enemy with cannon. You're sitting in a goldfish bowl. You're absolutely going to be shot to pieces. By the way, one of the regiments that surrendered in there was only in the Army for a matter of weeks, hadn't even been given weapons until they arrived here. They had virtually no training. They surrendered, and they were called cowards for that. They will do heroic work and be commended by one and all in Gettysburg. But that's the deal. So how else can you know what's going on? You have to see things. Here's a model of the train station as it existed in 1863. It is the train station where Lincoln arrived on November 18th, 1863. It's still there. Now, they've added on to it in the later 1800s, but it's available as part of your Gettysburg experience to go through it, and they'll talk about all sorts of things. This is now the center, that square that I showed you in the model. And this house here, right on the square, that's the George Will's house. That's where Lincoln stayed the night of the 18th. Hopefully he got some sleep. It was ridiculous because this 2,400 population town had about 15 or 20,000 mostly uninvited guests, many of them who got no sleep at all anywhere. George Will's had almost 30-some people he housed in his house that day. This is the route, how it looked when Lincoln came to give the Gettysburg Address on November 19th. This road still exists. It's in exactly this position, and back in here, you can't see it too well, this little tree here is what they call a witness tree. Because we have a picture of it, we know it was there then, and all trees that we can tell by photographs that are there are witness trees. As you can no doubt guess, there are fewer and fewer of them. And what they did is they took the general populace and took them off on a branch one direction, and the official delegation came up another direction and into an area that is above the National Cemetery. The major fighting in day 2 and day 3, and also the tail end of day 1, was on Cemetery Hill. Why did they call it Cemetery Hill? Because it was a cemetery there. Later on, they purchased the ground adjacent to that cemetery. That's where the National Cemetery is. And when you go to the National Cemetery and you see the plaque and the statue and it says, on this spot, Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, it's wrong. It's wrong. But it's been there so long, it now falls under the historical preservation thing. So every guy that says, okay, we can't move it, I can show you where it really is, and nobody really knows that either. Although the tour I was on this weekend, they took me to where the latest theory is where it is. It was at this cemetery, and there's the gateway to it. And it's partially offices and partially a residence. The Thorn family lived there. He was in the Army. He was not, his unit was not engaged at Gettysburg. His wife was there with their children. His wife was 6 months pregnant. Then the battle came. And you see the same structure over here on this one. So the crowd is mostly in where? In the Evergreen Cemetery. And there's a statue to her. And why did they put a statue to her? Well, she felt it was the family business to take care of the dead. And so after the battle, she saw that 106 soldiers were buried, she burying herself, at least 40 of them. You don't get this from a map. That may be a picture of Lincoln. Nobody knows for sure. Given his short talk, only a few minutes, less than 3, by the time the cameramen were set up, he was done and sat back down. And of course, here we have a sketch of what it might have looked like. There's a, sorry, it's blurry. That is one of the copies that Lincoln made. There are at least 5 copies, and they all vary from each other slightly in wording that he made of the Gettysburg Address. He did not write it on the back of an envelope. He didn't write it on the way up to Gettysburg, but he did finish it at the George Will's house. A little last-minute editing. This is the planned layout for the National Cemetery. Now, right back here, this area back here, that's where the Evergreen Cemetery is. So they had this huge monument, and then all the units by state are placed around that radius. Now, over here, you get all these little squares. Those are totally unknown. They don't know what state, they don't know anything about them. Although in here, originally these slabs were 6 inches above the ground. They are now just about flush with the ground. You see a lot of unknowns, but at least they know this was a New York boy. This was a Pennsylvania boy. Just a point of information. What state supplied the most battles for the Union at Gettysburg? Pennsylvania, by just a couple of hundred. What state suffered the most fatalities? New York. Events after the war changed the battlefield quite a bit. If the Gettysburg National Cemetery was the first national cemetery, and it didn't start out that way, it started out that way at the request of Pennsylvania Governor Curtin. Other Union governors were asked, hey, is this a good idea? Shouldn't we get together and do it? Later on, the federal government takes it over. Well, they put a trolley line through it at one time. Trolley line might move some geography around. In the 1880s, that's when regiments were coming back, and because they had more or less established a battlefield, and they were bringing back materials to make monuments. A lot of Union monuments come in the 1880s. Almost none from the South. Why? South still broke. In 1913, we had the 50th anniversary of the battle, and brother, did that ever change the geography of the park? Here's some photos of it. The big deal then was, what? Reunion. Let's forget about it. And so, oh, they were all housed on a big field. What's the big field? You heard of Pickett's Charge? That's the field. You'll notice, it's hard to see in this picture, but all of them wore cardboard tags with a string around the button. It was their name, all their vital information, like their address, any medical thing that they had. And these are 50 years after the battle. Many of them had, and almost every one of them was assigned a Boy Scout. 7 of them died during this reunion. They had a tent for feeding that could hold over 5,000 in one seating. And that's another shot of, and that too is largely on Pickett's ground, Pickett's Charge ground. Now here's Eisenhower, Camp Colt. What's that about? What's that behind? That's Ike, by the way. What's this behind him? That's a French light tank. How ready was the United States for World War I? Yeah, about that ready. Not at all. How many planes do we have? No. How many tanks do we have? No. So what did they do? They had tank training at Camp Colt. This is on the battlefield. We now have a regular railway line. We have barracks. We have tents. We have all sorts of stuff. And we also have, if you're going to train on tanks, you have tanks going over. You can still see that mound. It too is on Pickett's Charge ground. You see, that used to be a barn in that place. And you've seen barns like this, right? All right, now this is a stone barn. Now the barn that was there at the time of the battle was wood. And there was a house. You got to figure, you got a farm, you got a barn, you got a house that was there too. Now it was in between Union and Confederate lines. And at one point, the Confederates had run up, grabbed the house, get up in the barn. They're snipers. Union says, this is bad. They sent a force out to chase them out. And this went back and forth for over a day. And finally, the Union commander says, I've had enough of this crap. Burn it. So the only thing that was left by the time the battle was over was this berm. By the time they got finished running tanks over it and other things, it's a very modest lump today. 1917. All of these farms and stuff are still visible, and they're markers. But yeah, they push ground around. There's the encampment in 1938. And of course they bring in utilities and, you know. Did you know it was a prisoner of war camp in World War II? By the way, it had almost no fencing. And in the morning, most of them would hop on wagons and stuff and go through Gettysburg and a little north to a town called today Biglersville. It had different names in different times, which is an apple growing region. And the German prisoners were very happy to help with the farm and pick apples. And many of them did not want to leave after the war. There was an airport on the battlefield. Why not? What the heck? Airports don't require changing the geography any, do they? Sure they do. That's on Oak Hill, which is where the what do you call it? Where the eternal peace flame is. Now this is a modern day picture of the town. All these areas in the red are all areas that at the time were open. And one of the biggest gripes that the National Battlefield Group has is with Gettysburg College. But we won't get into that either. But it's all about land use. The seminary, the Lutheran seminary that was there, in fact, that was the fallback position of the Union troops before they were driven back to Cemetery Hill, is still there. However, this is a pretty good artist picture because you could see to the west almost a mile unobstructed. No houses, no trees. That's not the way it is today, as you might very well guess. But this seminary, like many, was running into financial problems, and they wanted to sell off these 2 chunks of land. There's an organization that used to be called the Civil War Trust. It's now called the American Battlefield Trust because it's into raising money to preserving land, not just of the Civil War, but of the Revolutionary War, War of 1812. And in just a few months, they raised the $3.6 million they needed to purchase that land, and then they turn it over to the park. So there's no better teaching tool than being actually on the field, seeing it from the soldier's perspective, hearing the individual stories, and getting the background material. What about the civilians? What about the blacks? How come just 12 miles from the Mason-Dixon line, fugitive slaves were so easily hidden by the Underground Railroad when a new national law in 1850 required that every citizen had to help apprehend and return slaves? Well, it was because of a congressman. Congressman was Thaddeus Stevens. He was a Republican. He sat on the board of the bank that held most of the mortgages on the farms. Now, you see why they might go against their conscience and, yeah, okay, we'll be helpful to runaway slaves. You didn't want Thad or the bank calling your mortgage. So again, as you can see, a little section on then and now. How you can preserve it and how you can't. Thank goodness we can't preserve the bodies in place. But this is taken from almost exactly the same position, and the trees change a bit. This is on Culp's Hill. After the Civil War was over, Culp's Hill was the most visited point on the battlefield. It is now the least. It was heavily wooded then, it's heavily wooded now. If any of you are familiar with the Killer Angels or the movie Gettysburg, we all know that one of the big heroes of that whole thing is Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. They held the extreme end of the left end of the Union line, and they bent their line around, and they withstood superior attacks, and they held them off, and they won. Day 2, a major amount of Union soldiers were pulled off the lower part of Culp's Hill, leaving the 137th New York as the last regiment on the other end of the Union line. It too was attacked by even more overwhelming numbers. Its line bent back. It held. Who knows about the 137th New York? A few of us. This is a picture done then. You notice the woods were a lot more open, and this will be a reoccurring thing. This is 1800s farmland. What do you do with your goats, your sheep, your pigs? They feed in the woodlots. Where are your bushes? Where are your shrubs? Where are your saplings? They're not there. So even when we preserve woodlots today, they look a lot different than the woodlots looked then. And what's this? There were several towers built, just like that. This one's on Culp's Hill, built by the U.S. Army. They use it for observation, they use it for training. There are still regular West Point courses done. They call them corps rides, and they discuss strategy. They still study the battlefield, and they study them from these towers. Now, a couple of them have been shortened because they're thought to be obstructions. And of course, you can see that this is a period picture. It isn't very clear. You see stone walls, you see debris, and here you see, and I go, watch the internet. What does that say? Anybody can read that. Emmitsburg Road. It is not the Emmitsburg Road. It is not. That building, Lydia Linder, I think her name is, that was her house. It was also George Meade, who was commander of the whole Union Army. That was his headquarters. Lydia had to move out, but for her own good, because the cannonading on day 3 just prior to the infantry charge at Pickett's charge, most of the Confederate artillery was fired long. It didn't hit the front line at all. It flew over the ridge, but it was clobbering this house. And even George Meade and his military left there. And here are other pictures of it, and this is the way it's restored today. The road is different. Naturally, it's paved. Notice the setback from the road is almost exact. This kind of fence, see a little bit of stone and then your crossed wood, that's to keep smaller animals like pigs in. Pigs can get under. If you're just dealing with cattle, you can use what they call Virginia worm, which is all wood crisscrossed. So you see, part of what the Friends do is restore things that look pretty accurate. And that's my favorite then and now picture, because they played one right over the other. And one of the first things that the park group wanted to do, and by the way, the national parks weren't happy when they were first approached by a Friends group. Who's this outside group going to tell us what to do? Are they any good at what they want to do? But one of the first projects, they said, Emmitsburg Road was there at the time. Pickett's charge crossed that road, and they said, you know, these houses, these utility poles, that doesn't look very original. And one of the first major projects they did, they raised money and such, and do you see any utility lines here? The Friends raised enough money to bury all the utility lines along Emmitsburg Road. That's not the only place. Here was a big observatory tower. It was a for-profit thing, and brother, purists of the Civil War said that thing's got to go. It went. There's an original house. It was originally belonged to a tannery. It is now many of the offices of the Friends Foundation, and some of your licensed battlefield guides have got offices up here. And Barbara Finfrock's library, that if you're at a certain level of membership, you can access, we finally attained that level, are in this house. It's a great little museum. In the back, they often have talks about period items, and sometimes just music, reenactors, all sorts of stuff. That's the way the railroad station looks today. Yes, the railroad goes beyond that point now. Another of the things, and that was falling into disrepair too, that was another Friends thing. Let's buy it, let's rehab it, let's make it useful. Plus, they used the argument, now remember, this is late 1980s, early 1990s. They're talking to the businesses in town and say, look, we really ought to cooperate more because you're going to die economically. Big boxes are going to come to the area, like Walmart. What has it done every other place it's gone? It's killed town businesses. We have got to cooperate. Let's get invested. Let's build this tourist thing, this educational thing. And that was a sales job that the Friends managed to sell. So in some ways you say, it makes it all kind of commercial. On the other way, it invests the community. All the cannon and carriages on the battlefield, and there's quite a number of them. I have access to the exact number, but I don't have it. But it's at least 160. Some of the barrels are authentic to the battle. They all have numbers on the muzzle, and so they know which ones were there at the time. They're actually there. But the carriages and the metal parts and the wood, they decay. They rust. They have to be painted. After you paint them enough times, you got to get the paint off. Sort of like the White House. The last time they took all the paint off the White House, they were taking off about 40 coats. The national parks, by the time the Friends got involved with it, were able to rehabilitate about 3 to 4 a year. Well, they're going to fall way behind. The Friends purchased a building, got a hold of people that know how to do it. Virtually every cannon piece on the field today has been rehabbed. as they more than quadrupled their ability to handle them. And now they come in on a regular basis just for tune-ups. Don't you wish you had somebody do that at your house, right? That was the visitor center. It was right across the street from the National Cemetery. It was small. It did have the electric map. That's gone. It has asbestos in it. You knew the modern world was going to louse up something. And it was taken down. Why? This is on Cemetery Hill. This is where the bulk of the fighting went on for 2.5 days. Didn't have a building there. If we're going to make it look like it looked then, get rid of the building. And that thing, which, by the way, the demolition of which was held up for 2.5 years, that's the building that the Cyclorama, that large round painting, was in. It was challenged just before they tried to take it down for its historic beauty. I don't see anything beautiful in that. I don't at all. So it's gone. And you see the picture on the right. That is a small portion of the platform in the new visitor center where you can view that painting. By the way, just in front of this is where the Bryant farm was. That's that black that I was restoring fences on when we unearthed a piece of china. It's sort of like Blue Willow, the white and blue. And brother, you can't take anything historical off that battleground. But the parks guy said, oh, we got lots of that. You can keep it. Thank you. Thank you so much. So here's a little thing. Gettysburg Address was here. Of course, the Cyclorama and the old visitor center used to be there. The entrance to the Evergreen Cemetery is back here. And so they moved that whole visitor center to the south, to an area that has no, yeah, of course it was on the battlefield, but nothing really happened there. And it's a great place for it, and the thing's huge. There it is. It was done in 11. The thing cost a fortune. They have a museum in there. They have parking lots. They have facilities for buses, bikes. Of course, they have a film. And the film includes some great speakers, including, who? Yeah. Morgan Freeman's one of them. I mean, it really brings it right out. Of course, they have a bookstore. The Cyclorama is housed in there. There is of course, a place where you can get information. You can get tour guides. There's a cafeteria there. And the whole thing was paid for by the Friends. Actually, we haven't paid for it yet. We're still paying for it. As soon as it gets paid off, the whole facility gets turned over to the national parks. That is one of the oldest fundraising things back in '89 when they were first starting. There are names of states on each one of these little plastic containers. They're rectangles with a little slot in top. And you vote for your state by putting a contribution in. They also have all sorts of things like big galas. When we were there last weekend, met a battlefield guide on her way. Boy, she cleans up really nice, I got to tell you. And she's headed in, and the whole fall muster program was over. I said, Sue, where are you going? She says, oh, there's a high roller benefit going on, a gala. That gala raised $500,000 this weekend. So what do the Friends do besides get education? What do we get to do? Well, that's painting fences on the Eisenhower farm. Now, I think if you strung all their fences together in one straight line, you'd probably wind up in Ohio. I painted fences there before. The farm, when Eisenhower was there, raised prize steers. It still does. They remove the bulls when you paint those pens. Good thing. You never get done. It goes on forever. The Friends also helped the national parks incorporate the Eisenhower farm into a National Historic Site and provided funds to upgrade not only the renovation and the upkeep of the interior. If you like the 1950s, go to that house. And if you like pink, And that was Mamie's favorite color. You'll see more pink. You'll have your pink fix for a week at least. And sometimes we're up on scaffolds. We're painting or doing stuff on large barns or stuff. Or sometimes we're cleaning. These are not the Gettysburg veterans, but it's a national military cemetery. So yeah, we have military. These are the ones that are on the ground. Those ones that I showed you that are in the... Now, these letters are all incised in the stone. Well, you can imagine after a few years between dirt and wear and rain and all that, you can't read the things too well. So one of the things my wife has done on many occasions and on these volunteer days, all the incised part is cleaned out. You then put 2 coats of dark, virtually black paint on it, and then you follow that up with a clear coat, and that should last 10, maybe 15 years. So that now yeah, maybe 5. But now when a visitor walks through, they can find it. And it was on one of those times when she was there, she found out she has a relative buried there. From the 24th Michigan, the Iron Brigade. We restore farmhouses that were on the field at the time. That's the Sherfy farm. That's out by the peach orchard. Before the war, shipped produce across the country and seedlings internationally. The place was wrecked, ruined. Guess what they got recompensed for from the government after it was all over? Nothing. And yet that black farmer that I told you that was near where the Cyclorama was, he got paid. But some of them got paid as little as $15. Many nothing, and some of them 80% of what they claimed, well over 1,000. There's no rhyme or reason to what the payment was. And it probably came 10 or 15 years after, not any time new. We also restore stone walls. They bring in a pro to lay the very foundation of it, and then they got all these mounds, and you can just put them on under his supervision. There's the Virginia worm fence. These pieces here at each angle have to be driven in. For 3 years, there was a local coach who brought his football team down. Let me tell you, you can't use those mallets, but it's really easy to build the rest of the fence. We've built miles and miles of those fences. They're restoring here at many times of the year. They bring volunteers in. By the way, you see this color shirt? These are called recruits. Probably none of you here qualify to be a recruit. You have to be between the ages of 18 and 40 to be a recruit. They're trying to get young people. Get a lot of people our age showing up there, but not a lot of young ones. And they've helped restore many of the orchards, and then they get them back at harvest time to harvest it, and then they make wine out of it, and we buy it. So here's your post and rail fences. They're tough to build, they really are. These are pretty easy, Virginia worm. And they wanted eventually to have more than 20 miles of restored fence, except they keep arguing over it. One day we labored, we put in almost a mile right by the railroad cut, and after lunch they said, it's in the wrong place, take it down. 2 years later they found out we were in the right place. Bureaucracy doesn't always work. When they restore a building, I mean they restore it, they go down through, because people have lived in it for many years since. Restoring a single window in one of those buildings costs $600 or $700 and takes 2 to 3 months, as every bit of original material possible is conserved. Now you have stuff like this up until a few years ago. This is the Appalachian Brewing Company's restaurant, great craft beers there, and behind it is a motel, and over here this building is often designated as Robert E. Lee's headquarters. Well, there's a controversy as to whether or not he actually evicted the woman that lived there. Many historians say, no, he pitched his tent near it, right next to it. But anyway, it was up until recently a privately owned little free museum, but it was surrounded by all this stuff. This is what it looks like now. The land was purchased. The building was restored as close as they can to it. This may be their next job. Because anything on the battleground that was, important, and this is one of the barns that housed hundreds of casualties. Wouldn't you want to put bloody and bleeding people in a barn? Oops, I went beyond it. Sorry. But anyway, we have a couple of statues. This is outside the George Will's house. Both of these are statues. And that shows Lincoln, and that depicts his arrival there on the 18th of November. This is at the Visitor Center. If you always wanted to have your picture taken with Abraham Lincoln, you can even do it sitting down. Now, a few months ago, he was taken away. When he was refurbished and refinished, he's back. He sits through rain and snow and everything else. What else do they do? Monuments need to be repaired, cleaned, and this is a mural. This was a brickyard. This area was a brickyard at the time of the battle. It's now in the middle of residential area. But there is a commercial building and then an empty lot next to it. And the entire wall of that commercial building, it's about as long as this building here, is an artistic representation of the battle that occurred there. And that, because it weathered and everything else over the years, it's been restored a couple times, and now they've put a glass-like substance over it to preserve it. That's part of what they do. This is on Oak Hill. That's the Eternal Flame. Well, it was built in the early 1930s. It was dedicated by FDR, and it's a great idea, and nobody ever figured out how they were going to pay for all the gas that it burned. Friends pay for it. You get idiots who do this kind of stuff to monuments. A few years ago, at the Peace Monument, there was spray-painted graffiti that was so tough to get off, it took them almost a year to figure out how to do it without damaging the stone. Friends take care of that. Plus, they just plain break. This is the huge monument at the National Cemetery. And for the 150th anniversary, they really wanted to take it all apart and clean it and then put it back together again. Well, it worked out that it would take too much time. They didn't do it, so they found an alternate way. And for almost a year, you could see hoses, one type with chemicals and one with water, and it alternated back and forth for a year. But that also was done, not a National Park Service wanted to do it. They didn't have the money to do it. This summer, the Friends are supplying 50% of the cost to redo the equestrian monuments of these generals: Meade, Reynolds, Howard, Scott, Slocum, and Lee. So even regular stuff. They want to remove trees. They're now growing where there weren't any at the time. And they usually do that in winter. Why? Because then you can bring in heavy equipment and not damage the ground. It's a great idea. And at one point, they wanted to take down miles and miles and miles of trees. But what they found out, here's a crew, you notice this? You gardeners, you know these loppers, right? You know? After you clear the ground, guess what happens? Stuff starts to grow back in it. And they've had to modify it because even with volunteer help, they know they're not going to be able to keep the amount of clear ground clear that they originally thought they wanted to. And believe me, you can find volunteers down there all the time doing different stuff. But we can haul away small pieces of brush or cut down small cedar trees. Hopefully you're not allergic to poison ivy. They have a lot. And this is a witness tree. That's going to stay there until Mother Nature takes it down. Remember, those are trees that we can tell due to photographs at the time were there at the time. There were two in front of a Lutheran church in town that had to be taken down, and you can still buy ballpoint pens made of the wood from the witness tree. Our best supporters are these guys. This is a picture from just fairly recently at the Pennsylvania Monument of all the licensed battlefield guides. They're not all there all year long. Many of them are seasonal. Some of them are not classified as licensed battlefield guides, but historians. This one right here, she's the one that did the major work on the, on the big picture in the Cyclorama. Sue Boardman, you want to get on her good side? Bring her a cupcake. She's an ex-RN. She knows how bad it is for her, but she can't resist the temptation. And what do? The Friends sponsors educational experiences for all ages, for all groups. These guys are unbelievable in their knowledge. Unbelievable. There we are at a special Friends Only, getting a tour. That's where I found out how much it cost them to restore a window. And the figure I gave you is not exact because I've forgotten it. We learned so much there. It's unbelievable. You learn the times. You learn the people. This is the big room in the visitor center where you would see the movie. When we go for Friends groups, we get talks and presentations there. That's another picture of that big monument in the National Cemetery that they cleaned. And then, of course, they were constantly removing. This is on the battlefield. That's a gas station. That's the beginning of a little motel. All that stuff had to go. And as soon as it becomes available, the group attempts to buy it, and then we demolish it and restore it to the way it looked before. And it isn't all just that. We get to do Remembrance Days. That is the weekend in November closest to November 19th, the anniversary of Lincoln's giving the Gettysburg Address. We have a parade, reenactors. It goes on for almost an hour, along that same route that Lincoln walked. In the rain, in the sun. And remember, this is late November, right? Women's bonnets. I swear, one of these times I'm going to go down there and take a camera and just take a picture of their bonnets. Most of them they made themselves. Probably aren't any two that are alike. And in the snow. We do it all the time. There used to be a guy in one of the Confederate units who walked barefoot every November in this. We thought he was going to get frostbite. That's the hill in that period picture where you started to see the people turning off to go to the National Cemetery. That is the exact same route, Baltimore Street. You went past that, the parade would have gone past that church. Later that day, after giving the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln would attend a service there with John Burns, the crazy 60-some-year-old 1812 veteran who at one time was town marshal, who grabbed his 1812-era musket and went out on the first day and fought with the Iron Brigade. He was wounded 3 times, eluded the Confederates, and that's what the illumination looks like that we do every Remembrance Day. There's over 3,500 that we set up. During which, at a time when they're lit, all the names of all of those that are buried there, even the unknowns, get read in 15-minute sections. Every half hour, everything stops, and one of the reenactor units plays taps. If you ever go, this is a ritual you cannot avoid. It is illegal. It is not allowed. You do not touch plaques. If you're from New York, that's Patrick O'Rourke. You rub his nose. Believe me, the Park Service has totally given up trying to stop New Yorkers from doing that. And there's a picture, again, left is the original, right is Devil's Den. One of the strangest rock formations in the whole park. And there you are up on top of Little Round Top looking down at Devil's Den. The Confederates came from back here. And believe me, when they came up, and just the backside of this, it's very steep. When they came up there, they thought they'd won. Wow, we're at high ground. They got to the top and then they saw this in front of them. Who put that there? You can tour it and just admire the unusual monuments. This is a teepee with an Indian in front. It's a symbol of Tammany Hall. Yes, that corrupt New York City political organization. Yep, that's what they put up. This one, maybe you can't see it too well. All the regular soldiers' equipment here, a plaque saying who they were, a bird's nest and a bird, and a cannonball. The tree was there when that unit fought. When the lull in the fighting, they noticed that the nest was on the ground. They picked it up and restored it. And when they came back many years later, they designed their monument after that. That's and if you're there for sunrise or sunset, and this weekend we saw a sunrise that was just unbelievable. We were fooled by the time we got up way too early. Before sunrise, we were on the top of Little Round Top looking west. So there's still not risen sun is behind you, but the sky's bright. But it's kind of pink, purple. And it's dark on top of the hill because of all the trees. And you looked out in front of you, and all the low ground glowed this red, then orange, then bright. And you were still in dark. So the Friends are trying to keep alive history. They're trying to preserve beauty. They're trying to remind people of just what Lincoln was talking about. And I did a 2.5, 3-hour tour. It's called the musters are our educational times. You go out twice during the day on a tour with a battlefield guide or a battlefield historian. And one of them was Lincoln and the nation. What did that mean? When he uses nation, basically it's what does the Gettysburg Address mean? And what relevance does that have to today? And the whole point of the Friends is to make the experience memorable, to make it educational, to all levels. They have corporate leadership stuff there. They have everything for every level. And if we don't remember what we did and what we learned, we'll forget to our detriment. That's it. Anything?
The witness trees.
The witness trees.
When they took that one down, did they take out the bullets and things? And
They usually find the bullets. If you go there, at the end of the day, you spend a hot day out on a battlefield. What do? Well, you go back up, right near Cemetery Hill. You go back towards the center of town, and you go to Mr. G's. First of all, it's probably the best ice cream in town. They have witness trees on there, and they had to take one down. The big table before you get into order is made from that witness tree. They also have a well where they have redug it and come up with relics from the war. But most people just go for the ice cream, really. But yeah, you can find them, and that's why Culp's Hill, about 15 years after the battle, Culp's Hill was almost denuded of trees. You fight for 2.5 days. There's a lot of lead in those trees. Some of the smaller ones were cut down at the battle. And many of them just outright died a few years later. So, but yeah, the Friends group tries to do an awful lot of things. It's very successful. And like one of the leaders said, right near the edge of Pickett's charge, there's still a number of commercial buildings. One of them is Pickett's Buffet. Busloads of kids love to stop there because they already know what it's going to cost them for a meal. They got all this stuff that they can choose from. It's a riotous place, and it's right on the edge. It's actually on the battlefield. There's no plans to remove that. One of the great benefits of going to Gettysburg Everybody gets hungry. Everybody needs restrooms. Everybody needs a place to stay. These things are right on the edge. They're accessible from the battlefield. So, no, there's no attempt to go all the way back to 1863. That's not going to happen. But to make it understandable, I've always been curious about the Civil War. I got infected, like I said, it was founded in '89, and we've been members since about '92. It was a lot less to be a member then. But the amazing stuff that they do, and they collaborate with all sorts of groups. The Lutheran Seminary, that building with that cupola on top, that General Buford got up on and said, "Oh, dang, Confederates are coming." That building has been turned into a museum, and we contributed to the early. So we're on a founder's plaque. Who cares? But when people with young families come and they say, "Should we go?" I says, "I don't know if you want to take your young kids in there, or if you do, avoid a couple of rooms. The ones that depict Civil War era medicine. They're so darn realistic. It might be too gruesome for a young kid." But everybody is cooperating in the town now. They're doing World War I stuff, World War II stuff. Again, you got it because you got Eisenhower. There's a tree on Emmitsburg Road, that one that runs right through the middle of Pickett's Charge, right near town. It's the only huge pine tree. What is that doing there? Does it have significance? Yes, it does. It was planted in honor of Eisenhower. That's where his headquarters was when he was in command of Camp Colt. They do not have a place for where General George Patton was when he was there, but Patton was there at the same time. And so you're getting this whole culture of history growing up in that area. You can go for music, you can go for art, you can go for any number of reasons, and constantly come away enlightened and amazed. So, yes?
So when did Gettysburg become a national park? That was way back, I mean, in the 40s, camping out there and
Yeah.
maneuvering. When did they do it?
It changed many times. It depends upon what era and what national bureau it was under. One time it was under the military ran it, and then it was in the Department of Interior, and then it only got incorporated into the national parks into the 20th century. You find little buildings around, which are nice strategic places. Way in the southern part, there's a little stone building. There are precious few restrooms on the battlefield. That's one. To the west, early in the first day, there's another little one. That's an original, back when it was run by the military. These were the early guides that were there. That's the one thing. By the way, they're putting in more picnic tables, but there are still precious few. But you can picnic on the grounds, yes. And you can walk anywhere. There are paved roads. The paved roads themselves will drive you nuts because they go over, partially old trolley lines. They changed it here, they changed it there. You can go into history of it and you see the way these different park roads moved around different places. Little Round Top itself, the last 4 regiment's supposed to be 1,000 men. By the time you get to this part of the war, any regiment that was 400 or more was a huge regiment. So the last 4 in the line, 20th Maine being the last, they could all see each other at the time of the battle. There is no way on that hill today that you can arrange those groups that can be seen. What's happened? After the war is over, boulders are taken for building. Roads are built, rebuilt. Everything changes. By the way, why is Little Round Top half-treed and half-bald? It was owned by 2 different people. The half that's bald was cut down early in that year and sold the lumber to the U.S. government to make gun carriages. You can take the auto tour. I don't think they'll tell you that. That's what I mean, the wealth of stuff that goes on. They'll tell you how a simple phrase, like in the Gettysburg Address, it is fitting and proper, Lincoln says, that we should do this. A fitting and proper. That is the social concept of the whole United States at that time. Go to the railroad station. You want to go somewhere? You want to go on a train, right? You sit over there. You're a woman. You want to go? You're over there. You're a man. They're fitting and proper. Everything was delineated and strict. And when you take all that apart, while doing a walk of what he saw and who he met on the way and what happened, you learn about it in an entirely different way. So if you don't have a park that's organized like this, you don't have it. You got great parks. But you need the interpretation, you need the originality, and you need the talent to tell the tale. Anything else? Yeah, George.
1895, it says it was founded as a military park.
1895, military park, yeah. At one point I had pictures of their uniforms. If I could put that in, you'd really have a laugh. Okay, thanks a lot, guys.